Merci, Monsieur le Président, and thank you so much for the very kind invitation to the beautiful island of Réunion. I really do hope to come back, and peut-être la prochaine fois en français. I will try. It's a great pleasure to share with you some of the work that we are doing at the Trade Law Centre. As the chairperson has indicated, TRLAC is an independent research and capacity building organization. We work very closely with a number of universities, and we look forward also to working with the University of Réunion in the future. The relationship between South Africa and the European Union has a long history. It goes back to the colonial times, during the 1800s, when golds and diamonds were discovered in South Africa. And this is the start of the trade relationship between the European Union and South Africa. South Africa started exporting commodities, gold and diamonds, and importing industrial goods and consumer goods. A very important step in the relationship between South Africa and the European Union is marked by the establishment of the Southern African Customs Union in 1910. This was a decision by a colonial power, the Great Britain at the time, to facilitate commerce and also customs and border management among its territories in Southern Africa. These were South Africa at the time. It had just become the Union of South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland. Very important in the relationship between South Africa and the European Union is that South Africa subsequently, as a result of the apartheid history, was not part of the Lomé Conventions, which from 1975, Lomé 1, 2, 3, and 4, governed the relationship between the European Union and African, Pacific, and Caribbean countries. In 1994, South Africa became a democracy for the first time. This marked an important step in a new relationship between South Africa and the European Union. But very important, we did not have a rules-based governance in terms of a trade relationship between South Africa and the European Union. The European Union suggested that we negotiate a free trade agreement. Now, it's important to keep in mind that South Africa is part of a customs union. So, in fact, the negotiations should have been between the customs union on the one hand and the European Union on the other. This did not happen. So South Africa negotiated a free trade agreement on its own with the European Union. And this is the Trade and Development Cooperation Agreement, which was concluded in 1999, entered into force beginning 2000, and fully in force in 2004, apologies. Subsequently, of course, South Africa became part of the Economic Partnership Agreement negotiations, and I will say a little bit about that. But let's first look very briefly at the post-1994 trade relationship. What did the Trade and Development Cooperation Agreement cover? And it covered, because it has to be a WTO-compatible agreement, 90% of total trade between the European Union and South Africa. 95% of South Africa's exports to the EU were duty-free, and South Africa liberalized 86% of trade from the European Union into South Africa. Some of the important exclusions on the European Union side: agriculture. On the South African side, industrial products, especially clothing and textiles and motor vehicles, which are very important in South Africa's industrial development ambition. But we move now to the next phase of the relationship between the European Union and South Africa. I think we have to keep in mind, as some of our presenters previously yesterday and today have reminded us about the Cotonou Agreement of 2000. The Cotonou Agreement was very important in paving the way for a new reciprocal WTO-compatible relationship between the countries in Africa, the Caribbean and Pacific, and the European Union. And therefore, the economic partnership negotiations started preliminarily in 2002, but really started in earnest in 2004. And a group of countries in the Southern African region, which have become known as the SADC-EPA group, started to negotiate with the European Union. South Africa was not part of that group initially because it already had the Trade and Development Cooperation Agreement with the European Union. It is also important to note that not all 15 SADC members joined the SADC-EPA group. The SADC-EPA group included Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Swaziland, Mozambique, and Angola, and initially included Tanzania as well. But soon Tanzania realized that it would be more appropriate to negotiate with the other East African Community members, so the EAC group. South Africa was admitted to the SADC-EPA group in 2004, and an interim SADC Economic Partnership Agreement was signed in 2007. The negotiations were formally concluded in 2014. The agreement was signed on the 10th of June in 2016 in Botswana, and since the 10th of October, last year, provisional application implementation has started. This is still subject to full entry into force pending the ratification by the European Union member states, which of course, with such a large number, can be expected to take some time. Mozambique has not yet ratified the agreement. Angola has not signed the agreement at all, but may accede to the agreement at some time. But the agreement has been ratified by South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland. It's important to note that the negotiations took more than a decade to conclude. That is quite a long time for these negotiations. What are the key provisions in this economic partnership agreement? First of all, very important to note that a number of countries enjoy duty-free, quota-free access to the European Union markets. Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Swaziland, and Mozambique all export duty-free and quota-free to the European Union. South Africa is treated a little bit differently. For South Africa, 98.7% of goods enter duty-free, and South Africa has removed 86% of duties on its goods as far as the European Union exports are concerned. Mozambique has liberalized 74% of its imports from the European Union. This indicates that this is an asymmetric agreement. In other words, the European Union has liberalized more than the partner states in Africa. A very important feature of the EPA agreement is the tariff rate quotas. And very important, I come from the wine growing region in South Africa, the Western Cape. 110 million litres of wine from South Africa will enter the European Union duty-free per year. 150,000 tons of sugar from South Africa will enter duty-free, and 80,000 tons of ethanol will also be able to be exported duty-free from South Africa to the European Union. This is important because, of course, South Africa does not have complete duty-free access to the European Union. Very important provisions related to safeguards have been introduced into the Economic Partnership Agreement. There are about 5 different safeguard provisions. These are very important, as after liberalization, trade increases and the import surges may harm or threaten to harm the domestic industry. So these apply, for example, specifically to agricultural products, where, of course, agriculture is a very sensitive sector. Another very important provision relates to geographical indications, so intellectual property provisions. More than 250 European geographical indications are protected in terms of the agreement, and also 100 South African geographical indications are protected, including rooibos tea, Stellenbosch and Paarl. These are related to the wines that are produced in those areas. Other very important issues that are provided for in the agreement, and these were quite contentious issues during the negotiations. First of all, the regional MFN clause. Now, this is important because it relates to other agreements that the countries in Africa may negotiate with, for example, India, Brazil, China, or amongst themselves. And very often an MFN clause such as this would mean that the preferences that are negotiated subsequently would have to be extended to the European Union in this case as well. The SADC-EPA agreement now states that the MFN clause applies only to new agreements with major economies such as the United States, and this may become an issue when we look at a post-AGOA dispensation for Africa. One of our presenters mentioned yesterday that AGOA, the 10-year extension goes to 2025, but after that, it is most likely that the United States would like a reciprocal agreement. So the USA is noted specifically as far as the MFN clause is concerned. But other major economies, Brazil, India, China, are also noted. What is very important as far as the regional MFN clause is concerned is that African regional trade agreements, such as the tripartite free trade area, being negotiated by 26 member states in East and Southern Africa, from Cape to Cairo, and the proposed continental free trade area that we have just started to negotiate, will not be subject to the MFN clause. This is very important to promote our own integration in Africa. Export taxes are also a difficult issue to negotiate in a trade agreement, in a free trade agreement. Export taxes are allowed on a limited number of exports and only for 12 years at predetermined rates. So export taxes have to comply with the provisions of the SADC-EPA agreement. I have noted at the last point on this slide, trade in services. Now, the agreement so far is only a trade in goods agreement. But some of the African countries in Southern Africa are interested to negotiate trade in services and trade-related issues such as investment and competition policy as well. South Africa is not interested to negotiate trade and services or other trade-related issues to conclude a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. This is quite important So South Africa has a trade and goods agreement under the Economic Partnership Agreement, but will not negotiate any other provisions. Just very briefly, the trade relationship. What do we trade with the European Union? And I have very briefly some data here. Since 2010, South Africa has a trade deficit with the European Union. And from 2015 data, we see that our major exports are precious stones, metals, and then some industrial products. Transport equipment feature quite prominently because South Africa produces a lot of motor vehicles, both for passenger and for transport of goods. So South Africa, being part of the global value chain, as far as the automotive sector is concerned, this is an important industrial export. We also export mineral products and vegetable products. Fruit and vegetables are a very important export from South Africa. Base metals are still important. What do we import from the European Union? Capital equipment, machinery, very, very important for our industrial development. Transport equipment as well, chemical products, plastic and base metals. So these imports are very important for the development of our own agriculture and industrial sectors. The key trading partners, if we look at the individual EU countries, the United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium, account at this stage for about 16% of South Africa's global exports, total exports, and 70% of our exports to the European Union. Trade and services, although we have no specific preferential agreement, is also very important. European investment in South Africa is still very, very significant for our own industrial development. This is just a diagram to show our imports and exports. Note from 2010, the red line is our imports, the blue is exports, so we have a trade deficit since 2010. A very important new development on the agenda that some presenters have noted already is Brexit. This very important decision at the referendum on the 23rd of June last year means that the United Kingdom will leave the European Union. We now know, since the 29th of March, that Brexit has been triggered. Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty has been triggered. This means that 2 years of negotiations will see the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union. Then negotiations will follow about its relationship with the European Union, but also, very important, its relationship in the World Trade Organization with other global trading partners, and also all the preferential relationships that the United Kingdom is part of now as it is a member of the European Union. Keep in mind, this will be quite a complex process. The United Kingdom joined the European Union in 1973. It is a member of the World Trade Organization in its own right, but it trades according to the European Union schedule of commitments from 1994. So the question now is, where will Africa be on the list of negotiations that the United Kingdom will undertake? So at this stage, the United Kingdom needs to define its policy towards its ACP partners to replace the arrangements that are currently in place under the European Union. As far as South Africa is concerned, it is very important to keep in mind that this has to be a UK SACU, Customs Union Agreement. South Africa cannot unilaterally negotiate an agreement with the United Kingdom. And I think this is extremely important to keep in mind. There are some very practical issues that have to be considered in the Brexit process, and this, I think, for South Africa means that until Brexit is effective, trade with the United Kingdom, as with all the other European Union countries, continues under the SADC Economic Partnership Agreement, the SADC-EPA. Some technical questions that we will have to negotiate, for example, not only with the United Kingdom but also with the European Union, is what happens, for example, to the tariff rate quotas, to the 110 million litres of wine that is exported from South Africa duty-free into the European Union. Much of that wine goes to the United Kingdom. When the United Kingdom leaves, will we still have a quota of 110 million litres into the European Union? And what will we be able to negotiate with the United Kingdom? These are some of the very interesting technical issues that we have to start thinking about now. In conclusion, South Africa and the European Union have a very long-standing trade and investment and development relationship. The relationship has been governed by a series of arrangements and agreements to date. Currently, it is the SADC, the so-called SADC Economic Partnership Agreement, that governs our trade. Brexit brings a new era. The new relationship between the United Kingdom and SACU has to be negotiated. This could have implications also for South Africa's relationship with the European Union. For example, if the United Kingdom would like to negotiate trade and services, and South Africa agrees, the European Union may also then be interested to open that discussion again. Final question: where will South Africa and the Southern African Customs Union, as well as all the ACP countries, be on the UK's negotiating agenda? Thank you so much.